This is NBC10 at Issue.
NBC10 at Issue. Is religion the sleeper issue of this 2012 race for president, or has it become a minor factor? Plus, the U.S. Supreme Court issues a decision on the rights of churches in a ruling now worrisome to some who had first praised it. Religion, the Constitution, and presidential politics, now on NBC10 at Issue. Good morning. I'm Steve Highsmith. People disagree over whether the religious beliefs of a presidential candidate matter, but it has been an issue for candidates over the years. Mitt Romney felt he had to address it directly in 2008, his being a Mormon. Now in 2012, some conservative evangelicals and Catholics are in the process of deciding whether to support or how enthusiastically to support Romney for president or other candidates. Others are judging how tolerant Rick Santorum would be. Others still accuse President Obama of being influenced beyond his acknowledgement of Reverend Jeremiah Wright. The political issue of a president and religion in a moment. But first, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled 10 days ago in a case involving religion. Civil libertarians and advocates for the disabled criticize it, but the initial reaction by religious groups was very positive. However, there is a small, perhaps growing concern among some in the religious community that its ramifications could be ominous. What is this decision, and how does it affect the practice of religion? With me now is Villanova Law Professor Michael Moreland. Professor Moreland's scholarly interests include law and religion. He worked in the White House and is a graduate of Notre Dame, Boston College, and the University of Michigan Law School. Also with me is Dr. Karl Benzio. He is a psychiatrist, and behavioral health is his specialty. Dr. Benzio is founder and executive director of the Lighthouse Network, a Christian-based nonprofit offering mental health and addiction services. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. This decision, first of all, before we get to it, where are we on the spectrum of separation in church and state, and where are we trending?
I think institutionally, with respect to the state and churches, I think that the court has pretty much come to a settlement about how it's interpreting the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, which doesn't mean, though, that there aren't lots of religious people who are very involved in politics, and that there aren't ways of cooperation between the state and churches through voucher programs for schools in some states, through faith-based ministries in many contexts. But I think that for the most part, we've arrived at a place where there's a fairly well-settled legal doctrine now that isn't likely to be upset.
Dr. Benzio, how do you see it?
Yeah, there was a great article in Newsweek a few years ago that looked at science and faith and how they come together and then are pushed apart. And as we advance scientifically, it's hard to keep faith and science apart, even though we try at various times. I think church and state are similar kind of colliding paths. Seems like they were very involved together in the beginning of our founding, but over the last 40 years, as science and autonomy has become part of our society, we try to push them apart, but there's various different issues that keep on bringing them together.
Well, let's take a look at this decision. This is Hosanna Tabor Evangelical Lutheran Church in Michigan. They had an employee. They wound up asking this employee to leave, and she claimed that it was not a fair decision. Explain more of what happened.
So this was a teacher at a school run by the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod in Michigan. And in addition to her responsibilities as a teacher of religious and secular subjects, she also had a ministerial call from within the religious denomination. And as a result of her issue of her disability claim, and she claims that the church retaliated against her when she started to complain and threatened to file a discrimination claim against them. And so she got the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EOC, to intervene on her behalf, and the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court over whether or not religious institutions are exempt from anti-discrimination statutes with respect to the hiring and firing decisions they make for ministers, which includes not just ordained clergy, but anyone who has a substantial responsibility for religious matters.
And she lost that case, and the court said, well, it's because of the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause. The government can't establish a religion. It was a unanimous decision?
It was a unanimous decision.
But did they all agree with the same rationale, or did the liberal justices and the strict constructionist justices have different opinions?
No, it was a unanimous decision on the sort of central holding of the case. There were separate concurrences, one by Justice Thomas and another by Justice Alito, joined by Justice Kagan, who of course is the most recent appointment to the court by President Obama, in which they discussed some of the details with respect to how one determines who is and is not a minister minister within the meaning of this ministerial exception. But it was a resounding victory for freedom of religion, for religious institutions who had won these cases routinely in the lower courts, in the federal circuit courts of appeal, which had held for many years that there was this ministerial exception in the Constitution. But it was the first time the Supreme Court addressed this and answered the question quite clearly.
And Doctor, your first reaction to this was positive?
It was very positive.
Most of the people who are in the religious community.
Yeah, as a person who goes in and puts together Christian and faith-based treatment programs for addictions, we want to determine what the qualifications are for those people that are going to be able to communicate, role model, and integrate faith and their clinical skills together, and to be able to practice that. So to be able to ask those questions about what is their faith background, what is their belief in God, Jesus, the Bible, those kind of things. That's the educational fund of knowledge that we need, but then also their ability to practice that as evidenced by their daily activities to be able to be a role model for the patients are important qualifications for that job in our program.
But do you now have a concern about how this could be used down the road?
Definitely.
And what is that?
Well, in part of that decision, they looked at we need to separate church and state. So that whole idea of separation of church and state, is there really a separation there, as we talked about this continuum, or is there separation of the organization of church and the organization of government as opposed to the individuals that are involved in that?
So you're thinking that someone could actually use this to create more of a firewall that keeps religious belief out of public?
Exactly. So government shouldn't be in church and decide the qualifications of the people that they hire, but also church and religious and faith beliefs should not be part of governmental matters, social policy, foreign policy, those kind of things. Which
you're saying they shouldn't, or you're saying your fear is that they won't allow it?
The fear is that they won't allow it, that they'll just say, hey, we need to separate these two.
I want to follow up on this in a moment. More on separation of church and state, and later the role of religion in this year's race for president. Stay tuned.
You're watching NBC10 at issue.